If we haven't met yet, my name is Alex Milosevich. I am 20 years old, and I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm now going to college at Baptist College of Ministry in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, which is where Pastor Kagan went. It's a great place, and really I just want to share in a few minutes how the Lord just changed my life and the story of how I came to the Lord. I did not grow up in a Christian home. In fact, my parents divorced when I was 3, and my dad was not religious at all. My brother wasn't, I wasn't, and on the other hand, though, growing up, me and my brother were forced to go to a church that taught you could lose your salvation. And we were forced to go every Sunday, but I was an absolute rebel. I hated going. I wanted to do my own thing. And I had one thing in mind in life, and that was how I could do what I wanted to do. It was all about me, and I had this endless vacuum of selfishness in my heart. It was all about what I could do and what felt good. And, this church taught you couldn't play video games. This church taught that you couldn't watch movies. This church taught that I couldn't listen to the music I wanted to listen to. And those things were all huge turnoffs for me, and I didn't want the Lord because of that. But yet, though the false doctrine was there, the Lord used this church the Lord used it to show himself that he was a real God to me, and that I was a sinner, and I was on my way to hell, and I knew that very clearly. And I also knew that God wanted me to give my life to him and to live for him. But I was a rebel. I didn't want that, and I remember a time specifically, as a little kid, I had all my Nerf guns, and I was about to go to bed, and I was like, Lord, if you're real, I pray you'd move this Nerf gun to the other room by the time I wake up. And I'd go back to bed, and I'd wake up, and lo and behold, that Nerf gun was still there. And I remember looking up to God and saying, see, you're not real. But I would just sit there. And my conscience bore witness that the only reason I did not want God to be real was because I knew I was a sinner, and I didn't want his standard imposed on my life. And I knew in those moments that, God, I know you're real. What am I doing? Who am I even talking to? I knew God was real, and he was seeking me. Well, the only thing I could do at that point was just to run and hide from the conviction. There was so much conviction every time I would do something, and I would just push God out of my mind, push him out of my head. And as I did this, as I ran away, it seemed like it stopped for a while. But there would be times here and there where God would speak to me again, and I know, and I just pushed him away. I didn't want him in my life. And it was partially because of the false perception I had about God. I had this idea that to be a Christian meant you had to dedicate yourself to live like a monk would, to live this super separated, holy life. It wasn't enjoyable at all. It was about how much you could suffer. And that was my idea of God. But I didn't realize at that time that God is a loving God, and that serving God is the most rewarding thing, and that it fills every single need in our life. Growing up through this time that I got to high school, and at that time we didn't have to go to that church anymore. And I started looking for things to satisfy. I would chase girls around at school. And all that left me was more empty, more hurt, more broken, giving my heart away and never getting it back. I would chase bad friends around and just get some thrill out of doing bad things and breaking the rules and doing what I wanted to do. Music was a big thing to me. I could find consolidation in the songs that the message spoke to my heart. But all it did was bring me worse and worse and lower and lower. And I remember going into counseling at school for wanting to commit suicide and not wanting to be here anymore and finding no hope anywhere. And I resorted to being so image-focused that I became bulimic. As a young teenager, I became bulimic in high school. I would forcefully become that, and I would resort to cutting to find some source of hope and joy. But it left me worse off and worse off. And at that time, I had a stepmom for about 9 years, and it was that time that her and my dad had some problems, and she left as well. And as a young man in high school, 9th grade, I just found myself in a place of darkness and no hope and not knowing what was next. And I knew that God was not on my side. There would be times I would maybe pray about something, and God would not just answer. The opposite would happen. And I was at this dark place, and it was that summer of my 9th grade year that my grandma, who is saved, reached out to me for the first time. And she asked if I wanted to come down and spend time with her. So I accepted, and I went and I spent time with her, and she just loved on me. And while I was with her, I felt so accepted and loved, and she would start talking about this Jesus that I've heard about. And every time she'd start on one of her rants or her lectures, I'd go, oh, here we go again. Let's just get through this. Let's just listen and bear through this so I can have fun again. But she started talking about things, how God had a very specific plan for my life, and how God loved me, and that God had someone else for me. He created someone for me. As a young man, that brought a lot of excitement, that God was so personal, and he had just this immense plan for my life and wanted to bless me and give me good things and to give me peace. And as I heard these, I pondered on them. It was thoughts I'd never heard before. And it was through her that I met my pastor, what is now my pastor, and his family. He's got 5 sons. They were all my age and older. And these young men just loved the Lord, and they were really fit. You know, as a young guy, we look up to role models. We want that, the friend group that's in shape and strong, and these guys were in shape. They were strong. They knew why they believed what they believed. They had answers, and they loved God. And they invested in me. They would take me aside and take me hiking and have fun with me. And it was through that I realized there's something these guys have that I don't. They keep talking about Jesus, and I've heard that all before, but what is it they have? And I remember just being at a weird place where I started really seeking. And it was through that the Lord kept answering my questions. They would stay with me into hours into the night, answer the questions I had, and they would just invest in me that way, and they loved answering those questions. And there were answers to the questions I had, and God used that. I remember one day traveling home, my grandma was taking me back home, and they were putting on this Bible camp later this summer. And I was like, Grandma, it would be so cool if I got saved during that Bible camp. And she was like, that would be cool, but we were never promised another day. Why don't you think about making that decision tonight? And so I went home, and of course I was taught that, I was shown from the Bible that salvation is not about what we can do. It's not about earning our way to heaven. It's not about our own righteousness, but it's about trusting the sacrifice that Christ already gave us on the cross and trusting in him alone. And I got home and I said, Lord, I pray you'd save me. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of fighting. I pray you'd save me. And at that moment, there was an immediate change, and I knew God was with me, and he gave me joy and purpose and peace. And the biggest paradigm shift for me was when I realized I was just doing my thing, and I remember thinking, man, the biggest difference was I used to be bound to living for selfishness, living for what I wanted to live for, but now I'm freed to live for Christ. And that has governed every decision that I could make at that time. And when I did that, just the peace of God and purpose, divine purpose, just carried everything I did. And I saw God's hand in my life. And it's been one step at a time, just growing in him. And he allowed me to go on missions trips and just to serve the Lord in different capacities. And he called me to the ministry. And I remember just making that choice to surrender to the steps he gave for me, that this peace that I've never experienced before would just come. And it's been getting sweeter every single day.